I am happy to be here and go through a little bit about Google Classroom. So just to start with, Google Classroom is considered a learning management system, and the benefit of Google Classroom is that it's integrated with Google Apps, and so it allows teachers and students to interact and share files easily. As with many things Google, they release updates all the time. So one of the challenges with providing support for students, for parents, or to have a how-to video is that the screens often change several times a year. And so we do our best to keep up with that and to be prepared for questions, but that's one of the reasons that it's hard for us to have perpetual materials available to support families in that. We have offered training around Google Classroom every year for new teachers. And as we rolled out the one-to-one program, we trained teachers every summer just before school came back around the Google Classroom management system and other apps that are on the iPads. We do training throughout the year, so often on teacher work days before, or the PD days before the school year starts, we do updates around the Google Apps and Google Classroom, and then I'm always available to teachers to help more, and they often reach out to colleagues as they navigate updates or learn different ways to use Google Classroom. In this remote learning time, clearly Google Classroom has changed in the way that it is used and the universality of it. And we've battled some of the bugs around that with Google's servers managing many different uploads and processing of videos and things. Fortunately, that seems to have worked out in most places. And we also, the benefit of Google Classroom is that there is some flexibility in the way that teachers use it, so they can better match their own classroom styles and teaching styles. Of course, we know that that can be a challenge for families as you interact with Classroom, as your students interact with Classroom in different ways. So we are always looking for best practices. We have reflection tools in place already for this year. We're looking at ways to gather information from students and families as well, so that we can take that into next year and be sure that we're working to address the best ways to use Google Classroom or other materials, other platforms, other software, to be sure that we're working most efficiently with teachers and with students and with families. So moving into Google Classroom specifically, Google Classroom, I'm going to focus on the Google Classroom app. It can be accessed on any device. So it can be accessed in a browser at classroom.google.com. It can be accessed on a phone. It can be accessed on a Chromebook. But I'm going to focus on the views in the Google Classroom app, since in our one-to-one iPad program, the Google Classroom app is what students are using to access Google Classroom. So on the left-hand side, you'll see an icon of the Google Classroom app. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the main home screen that you get when you tap on the Google Classroom app. On my home screen, you'll see several classes that I'm enrolled in. If your student has not enrolled in any classes yet, that will be a blank page asking them to join their first class. So on the classes screen, when Google Classroom opens, they're listed here, and it's kind of the landing page in the Google Classroom app. You'll also see that under a couple of the classes, there are white bars with assignments or materials that have been recently posted for the students to access. In the right-hand corner of that screen, you'll see the plus button in a circle, right-hand bottom corner. It appears in a different place in a browser, but on an iPad, it's down there in the right-hand corner. And you'll see that here I've shown what happens when you tap on that plus sign. So you get the option to join a class. And so this is just telling you how you would do that. You get a class code from your teacher. Most of your students have probably already done this. And once students, they have to be logged into the app with their MVSD Google account. We only allow our Mill Valley School District Google accounts to access our Google Classrooms in order to make sure that we're keeping it manageable for teachers and not having extra people joining our classes. And they can also be invited to join via email. So they can get a class code, but some teachers choose to email their students. And then there would be a link in their email to join the class and an invitation kind of sitting in their Google Classroom classes list to join the class. Again, most of this is done earlier in the year. Some of your students may have done this in remote learning if their classes were not using Google Classroom much before the shelter in place. I would also add that you may see that I have an 8th grade, a 7th grade, and a 6th grade class in the account to which I'm logged in. Your students should all be enrolled in a grade level class for their current grade level at MVMS. We started these classes this year so that we could have a way to provide announcements to students in a format that they're familiar with because they're using Google Classroom for their classes. So each of your students should have a grade level class in their Google Classroom that they're enrolled in. And this is where things like the 8th grade t-shirt contest was submitted to students, where the voting is actually posted for them, and then announcements about things like when the Zoom app was available or how they can get tech support. So after they've joined the class, then there's a menu bar in Google Classroom. So we call it the hamburger menu as opposed to the waffle menu. If you're in at google.com and logged in a browser, you'll see the 3x3 grid in the upper right. We call that the waffle, and that's where you can navigate between Google apps in a browser. On the Google Classroom app, and many Google apps, there are hamburger menus, and this is where students then have access to a variety of different things, switching between classes, looking at the settings for Google Classroom, going to the calendar or the to-do list. So if we click on tap, I say click, but I mean tap if I'm on an iPad. If we tap on calendar in the hamburger menu, that will actually open the Google Calendar app. And the student will be logged in with their student account, kind of transferring from Google Classroom to Google Calendar. Their assignments here that have due dates will be populated on their Google Calendar automatically for them. The view in Google Calendar lists the assignments on their due date. So if an assignment doesn't have a due date, it doesn't appear on the calendar. So there may be times where teachers instruct students to add events to the calendar, or it may be that the calendar is not an efficient way for your student to keep track of assignments during this time because due dates are different during remote learning. But I just wanted to point that out because during the school year, it can look different. In the Google Calendar, there is another hamburger menu, and if you tap on that hamburger menu, you then have an option to select which classes you're viewing. So you can see here that my Pet Care 101 class is kind of in a raspberry color. I'll see if I can get my pointer going here, right here. That's in the Google Calendar hamburger menu, and that with a check mark next to it is just showing that it's visible on my Google Calendar. So if your students' assignments are not populating on Google Calendar, but they have due dates, it may be that your student needs to enable that in the calendar. And we do our best to put this information out to teachers, often through Panther Time or another class, or posting it in Google Classroom for students. So for example, when we know that there's something like this for students, we work on posting it in a variety of places, providing them that information so that they can be sure that they are keeping up with their classes as efficiently as possible.
Kate, can I jump in for a second? Someone was asking for clarification. Are the teachers able to post Zooms to all student calendars? And if so, would they be willing to do it? If you could just clarify a little bit more about that, about whether it has to be manually input or if teachers can automatically set that up.
So if the Zoom does not have a due date, like if they're not posting the Zoom as an assignment in Google Classroom, it would not show up in Google Calendar. It's not something where Zoom links with Google Classroom the way that Google Meet does. And we've stuck with Zoom. Some people are trying Google Meet. We're trying both. I'm sure that we'll have discussions about whether we should go with one over the other, but Zoom does not automatically populate the Google Classroom calendars on the Google Calendar because there's not a direct link between Zoom and Google Classroom. So it would have to be in kind of added there by the teacher, adding it as an assignment with a due date. And by adding it, I mean creating an assignment, adding the Zoom link to the assignment, and then putting a due date on the assignment that is the time of that class, which may or may not be an efficient way for teachers to manage it, depending on how many Zoom sessions they're doing, whether all students are invited to them. When teachers create assignments in Google Classroom, and we're going to look at assignments in a few minutes, when teachers create assignments in Google Classroom, they have the option to post it to all students or a subgroup of students, and that's all done manually. So if a Zoom link was to a specific group of students in the class, it's a manual process for the teacher to select which students that's going to, and may or may not be an efficient way for the teacher to share that Zoom link. So it's more likely that the teacher would post it as an announcement in the class, which would not include a calendar reminder. And I understand that that's can be harder when it's not, there with a date on it, and certainly something we can consider offering best practices to teachers about for next year.
Thanks, Kate.
Mhm.
One more quick comment.
Sure.
I wanted to let everyone know that today's call is being recorded, and we will put this up on the PTSA website, and we'll send it out through Parent Square, so you can view it later if you miss any of it. And also, Susan is doing all of the back end, admitting people and doing the waiting room and muting and unmuting. So if you have any chat questions, make sure to send them to me, Jen Moore, and then I can make sure I funnel them through to Jonna and Kate. Thanks.
And I would also add that this is a slideshow that I'm sharing with you now rather than the live iPad screen, so that I can stay on a screen and show some steps between things. And I will be sure to share this in a PDF form with you, Jen, so that it can be posted on those. And I'll also post it in the one-to-one program section of the middle school website.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so another option in the hamburger menu in Google Classroom is the to-do list. And the to-do list includes classwork. So these are assignments that have no due date and due dates, but they don't include materials. So they would basically be things that need to be submitted. Like if they have, if they are an assignment, or if there's a question being asked, the student needs to submit the question, for example. So there's separate sections in the to-do list for missing and for no due date. And then additionally, as you can see from this screenshot, there are items sorted by due date. So right now I'm just seeing purple items. That's because these are all from my Pet Care 101 class. If there were additional items from other classes, they would have a different color bar on the left-hand side corresponding to that classroom's theme, and they would be added under the due dates as well. So the stream is the main page in classes. We will be talking mostly about the stream and classwork today. When students open a class, it goes to the stream. So when I tap on MVMS Journalism on that smaller slide in the middle of my screen, then over here I tap on stream, or it will land on stream. I can navigate between stream and classwork and people. And if I tap on stream, then I get my, my announcements and things that are posted to the stream. So it's the primary pane in Classroom. And typically announcements and classwork are posted in the stream. Depending on the settings the teacher has used, comments may be posted there also if commenting from students is enabled. Some people have done that during remote learning so that there's more of a back and forth between students, which is helpful if you are working on a lesson or collaborating, clarifying assignments and things. Announcements appear with the profile photo or initial of the person posting, like this, versus classwork appearing with an icon representing the type of classwork. Some teachers may only be using the stream for announcements. There's a place that teachers can exclude classwork from the stream. So again, that's based on how the teacher has decided the best way for their class to flow is. And again, we understand that having differences like that can be different or more challenging for some students to follow. And we will be sure to work with teachers to talk about the benefits in consistency as well as the benefits in individuality and teaching style. Okay, so then if I move to the classwork tab in Classroom, I see the things that are posted as classwork. So this is things like materials, assigned items, assignments, questions. Items that are gray, like here, are complete or don't require submission. Like if it's a material, this is an assignment that I've already turned in, so it's gray. And things that are the color of the class, those are things that do require submission and I have not completed them yet. The People tab, which is the last along the bottom, includes the teachers and students in the class. So teachers have the option to include co-teachers in the class. Sometimes those are teachers who are working with them or supporting students in the class. Sometimes it's people like in our grade level classes, we have several teachers, including Jonna, for example, the administration, so that they can post things directly to the class without only one person responsible for that. So back on the classwork tab, I can use the filter option. So this is shown right here on the on the classwork page. I can filter by topic. So teachers may use topics to organize the classwork section, and you can then filter by topic to see only the items that are posted in that topic. Things can move around between topics. So topics are a relatively new feature of Google Classroom, and teachers are choosing different ways to use them as they figure out what works best. My son actually, so my older son is a kindergartner this year, and he is actually using Google Classroom through the San Rafael City Schools to get and submit work through his teachers. And the kindergarten team at his school have created topics for each week, and then other topics for things like read alouds that are posted by different staff members at the school. So for a situation like remote learning, certainly a current week or a week of topic that you would move to the top of the classwork list would address some people's concerns around how you find out what the work is for that week. We know some people are doing it that way. Other people might be using topics like resources or assignment submissions and group work or something like that, and then posting things in that. So again, one of those things that we will be revisiting with teachers as we consider best practices and recommendations for moving forward if we are in similar situations next year. So after or next to the filter option is this little icon that looks like a person, and this is kind of a work list. So it's similar to the to-do list, but it's the work list specifically for the class that you are in. And it lists only the classwork items that require submissions. And on the side here, you can see whether it's assigned or whether it's turned in, and then whether there's a due date and whether there are attachments or private comments. So this is another way of viewing work in classwork. And in fact, there's an option here to sort this classwork. This is the work list filter by things that are assigned, things that have been returned with a grade, and things that are currently missing. Another important thing to note is the way that you refresh a screen in Google Classroom. So you kind of pull down. So from near the top of the screen, but not all the way at the top, because then you'll get a menu. You can pull down your screen and you'll hold it. You'll see a little icon appear at the top, like a little refresh arrow circulating around. And that would be that I'm refreshing the stream that I'm on, or I'm refreshing the classwork. This is useful if it looks like the student is missing something that they know they should get, like a morning message in the morning or something like that. So they pull down to refresh the stream or classwork feed in each class. Now on to assignments. So back in the classwork tab, if I tap on a specific assignment, it opens the assignment. The assignment then includes the title, if there is a point value associated with it, whether there are class comments on the assignment, and then a description or instructions, as well as any attachments that the teacher is including. The Your Work section, so that's down here at the bottom, and we're gonna expand that in just a minute, is where students can mark it as done, turn it in, or add their own work. These options are different depending on whether the teacher or student has attached work to the item. So we're gonna look at the different options there in the Your Work section. This looks different on a laptop. So again, on a browser, the Your Work section is in a box up on the right-hand side, rather than being at the bottom like it is on an iPad screen. So on an iPad, you need to tap the arrow, this little arrow right here, in order to expand the Your Work section. So this first expansion is a small expansion. There's also a full page version that I'll show you. And here you can see the options to add an attachment or mark as done. So mark as done is because there's currently nothing attached to the work. But for example, in the assignments example that I'm sharing, it just says review the attached photo, then mark the assignment as done. So if it's something like view the video or something like that, your student doesn't need to attach anything, they just need to mark the assignment as done. So they would just tap that mark as done option, and then the work will show as submitted. They just have not turned any material in, they've just marked the work as done. So here's an assignment with a PDF. When students get assignments with PDFs in Google Classroom, they might be asked to open the PDF in another app or to annotate directly in Classroom. So I'm going to walk through both of those options. So from the classwork page, I've tapped on Sight Word Practice. This is one of my kindergartner's assignments because it was something I could easily do. So probably not something you're likely to see with your students, but manageable. So here you can see that I have an attachment, a sightwordshe.pdf file. And if I tap on the sightwordshe.pdf file, it opens a preview of the PDF. So now I'm looking at the PDF and it's opened in my screen, and I can now, in the upper right-hand corner, you should see the option or the pencil icon, and that will allow me to annotate the PDF directly in Google Classroom. So if I tap that pencil icon, it's going to open the PDF with these editing tools at the bottom. If for some reason you're not seeing the whole screen, maybe because your Zoom toolbar is there, you can actually click and drag your Zoom toolbar to another location on your screen if you're not seeing along all the items along the bottom of my screen. So here you can see that I used a pen tool in a purple ink to circle different items and then practice writing she. Now there's a save button in the upper right hand corner. So it looks a little different because there's a save option. And if I tap that save option, what it's going to do is add my edited PDF directly to the Your Work section of this assignment. So students complete the work on the PDF in Google Classroom and then attach it to their work. And that's done by tapping the save button. Now you'll see that instead of having mark as done here as an option, now the button has turned to turn in, because now there's material attached to that section. Okay, so another option is an assignment that has like more instructions and something that needs to be watched. So for here, for example, I'm going to be asked to, in item 2, open a new Google Doc. So here, if I open the Your Work section, I'm going to choose to add an attachment. And this time, I'm going to see what those add attachment options are. So when I tap add attachment, it opens the larger Your Work screen. And then it opens these options for things that I can do. I can add a file from Drive. I can add a link. I can upload a file that I've already created. I can pick a photo from my photos or camera roll. I can use the camera to take a photo of something, like if I've done art on paper or completed work on paper. I can create a new doc, and this would open then in Docs and automatically attach any one of these files to the Your Work section in my Google Classroom. Okay, so after I have attached, let's see, I think it went too many. Oh yeah, okay. So here I was back on adding an attachment, and then it would be added to that work, kind of like the PDF was, very similarly. So instead of having mark as done, it would then move to turn in. So another option is for teachers to choose to have copies made for students. So if the teacher is creating a template, for example, the teacher will create the template. In this case, I've created a slides presentation, and then I created a template slides presentation, so I'm attaching a copy for each student. That's automatically in the Your Work section. So my instructions say to open the attached slides presentation, enter my tips on slides 3, 4, and 5, and then turn in the slideshow. So this is nice because instead of having to create the file in Google Drive, make sure I share it with my teacher, make sure I tell the teacher what the name is, it's named it for me based on my name and the title of the file that that the teacher created, and it automatically attaches it to my work. So instead of saying add attachment and new slides, this was put here for me by the teacher making a copy of it. You'll also see that this says turn in instead of mark as done because the work is already there. If your child doesn't open the slides presentation and marks turn in, then they've submitted the blank template slides presentation rather than any edited work. So even though it's already attached there, they still need to go in and do the work on the slides presentation before they can turn it in. So if I tapped that slides presentation, I would see a preview of the slides file, and then I would have the option up here, which would open it. So we call that the open in arrow, and that would open the file in the associated app, in this case, slides, where I could then edit it, come back to Google Classroom and turn it in. There's no saving necessary because it's like other Google file types where all the changes are saved automatically and the file is updated. It's just providing the link to that file. So last kind of assignment here, there's a question. So maybe your teacher does daily questions, your student's teacher does daily questions. They post the question, it includes a due date for when it's done, like an assignment, but rather than having to attach a file or look for an attached file, they actually type their answer right here in the question, and then they have the option to tap turn in. Teachers can choose whether they make student answers to questions visible to the class or private only to teachers. So sometimes it might be that you're having a discussion via the questions that kids are responding to, or that you're really only looking for questions that students might have about an upcoming test or something like that. So another thing that students might encounter in Google Classroom are private comments on their work. And in that case, that would be shown by the private comment icon down here in the Your Work section of an assignment. As I showed earlier, it also showed up in this work list. There was this same icon in the work list on any items that have private comments. So this is telling me that there's a private comment. And if I open the Your Work section further, I see the private comment that the teacher left to me here, and I'm able to add my own private comment back. After work has been submitted, instead of saying turn in or mark as done, this changes to unsubmit. So if a student wants to edit something or realizes they added the wrong file, they must unsubmit the assignment in order for them to be able to resubmit something new. The teacher may have restricted that option. So sometimes teachers want to see what students have submitted and they don't want students to have the ability to unsubmit work. The teacher will also see when the latest submission was made. So if a student unsubmits something and then resubmits it, even if they submitted the first item before the due date, if they submitted their new item after the due date, it will show up as a late submission. And that's something that they could add a private comment about, why it was late, or whether they made any changes between one submission and the other. All right, so another thing that might show up in classwork are materials. And materials are resources, items that the teachers want students to access, but that don't require submission. So in this Google Classroom, there's a section called resources. Depending on the topics in your students' Google Classroom, there may or may not be a section called resources. It may be part of current work, or it may be part of a specific topic. And then here, this icon looks different. It's gray because there's nothing to submit, but it doesn't look like an assignment. It doesn't look like a question. It kind of looks like a page with a bookmark. And then from there, I can tap on the item. There's an attachment, this comic book PDF page, but I can't submit it because there's nothing to submit. I don't have to attach anything. I don't have to turn anything in. I just am looking at this and perhaps doing something with it. Like in this case, I might be trying to open this PDF and edit it in Notability, for example. So I wanted to walk through the steps that looks like, because that is a pretty common occurrence for students. So up here in the right-hand corner, again, as I'm looking at the preview, I have the option to open in. It's kind of that open in arrow. And if I tap that open in arrow, the file, this is a PDF, so it's opening in Google Drive, where students then have the 3 dots menu to select options. When they tap on those 3 dots, they then get all these options. This is where they could print things. This is where they could make a copy if they needed to, or share it with someone else. That's up here at the top. But we're gonna look at the send a copy or open in. So if I choose send a copy, then I get this screen that gives me options to airdrop it. We actually have airdrop off on student devices, just so that you are aware, because it's not a particularly private sharing option, but it's very anonymous. And so we have that turned off on all student devices, which I understand makes it challenging sometimes for students to work between a personal device and a district device, but you can always use Drive as the sharing place. You can upload something to Drive, and then because you can access your MBSD account on any device. So if I don't see Notability in my quick options here, I can tap More and then select Notability from the list. When I select Notability, it prepares to export and then gives me a few options to organize it in Notability after it is added to Notability or exported to Notability. So then sometimes there are questions about notifications for different classes. Notifications can be set for each class and can be on for email or device notifications, or both. So device notifications are those notifications that pop up like texts on devices, and emails go to students, student MBSD emails. These can actually be set at both the class level and the device level. So there are several ways to get to these settings. I don't think I'll go through all of those steps, although they are here in this slideshow if you want to refer to them again. So in the hamburger menu, if I then go to settings, I can then get to notifications and look at both email notifications and device notifications. And so here's where I could turn on different things, whether I want notifications about comments, whether I want notifications about work and other posts or returned work. And then I can go to the class notifications to turn on or off notifications for specific classes. Another piece of Google Classroom is that it creates a folder in Google Drive. So it automatically, you have, as soon as students log into Classroom for the first time, they have a classroom folder in Google Drive. And then in that classroom folder, they have individual folders for each class in which they're enrolled. Like here's a classroom folder. Here are the folders for the different classes that they're in. And within that folder, they have the files that have either been attached for them by the teacher or that they've added as their work. So it's kind of the real place that the files live. Google Classroom is just the interface between Google Drive. And so Google Classroom is where you see it. It's technically being stored in Google Drive, which is why things then open in Google Drive if you're not annotating directly in Classroom. Google Classroom Guardians. So the last piece that I wanted to touch on are Google Classroom Guardians. Guardians are something that teachers choose whether to enable, and they are kind of linked parents to students' Google Classrooms. So they do not give parents access directly into Google Classroom. Instead, what they provide is a summary, an email summary for parents about the classes for which Guardians have been enabled. You can get a daily or a weekly summary or no summary. You can select to unsubscribe from summaries. Assignments with due dates show up in the summaries, and I believe that Google updated something this spring for announcements to show up as well. I can try to adjust this slide to be sure that that captures the current Google Guardians summary information. If a parent is a guardian for one class, that parent is automatically added to any other class that the student is enrolled in, but the teacher still must enable guardians for that feature to be available to you for that class. And not all teachers do because they choose to communicate with parents in other ways. So if you don't have guardian access, or if you're looking for more specific access into your student's class, the best thing to do is to ask your student for their login information, which we do require that they share with you, and they are not supposed to change. And then you can actually log into Google Classroom yourself and see things there. Of course, we would recommend that you, as much as possible, sit down with your student and go through things with them, showing you the navigation and what they've turned in. But I, as a parent, know that that's not always possible. Sometimes it's 11 p.m. and that's my chance to check what Owen turned in that day. So certainly logging in on your own device is an option as well. Here are those Google Classroom Guardian settings that you can select for when you are receiving information. Okay, finally, other questions, Jen? Oh, hold on.
You're muted.
Jonna, did I forget anything? Well, Jen.
That was fantastic, Kate. Thank you. I learned a couple things too.
Kate, there's a lot of questions basically about standardizing teacher use of Google Classroom. So confusion among students and a confusion among parents because each teacher seems to use Google Classroom in a different way. And some concern that if we continue to have distance learning in the fall, would there be some sort of standardization of that to make it a more effective tool and make parents be able to follow up on it more easily because all the teachers would be using it in the same fashion?
I am certainly happy to bring that to the MBMS administration and staff and discuss that with them. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that, well, there may be one teacher that is doing it great for one student, another teacher might be doing it great for another student. And so, well, each family might be thinking about different things in terms of what would be a really helpful way to organize it. And just like often students can really connect to one teacher or one classroom because of the way that things are done in that classroom, one of the benefits of middle school is that you are seeing different teachers. That said, I certainly understand and appreciate that during this time of remote learning, it is a different scenario than just supporting what's going on in the in-class, in-person classroom. And certainly something that Jonna and I can work together, because she is running a couple of Google Classrooms right now and works very closely with the teachers to think about ways that we might be able to reflect with the teachers on what was working or what questions they have. And then, as I said, I'm sure there will be opportunities for families and students to share their own feedback about what was helpful and what wasn't. And we can try to direct that around Google Classroom so that we can gather that information and see if there are some consistent ideas around what is best or not.
Great.
I totally agree. I just thought I'd hop in for just a second. Some of that really depends on the subject matter as well. Like for the MVMS library, Google Classroom, that is kind of dictated by the type of material that I put up, whether it's video book talks or questions or whatever. But for some of the teachers that I co-teach with, and on their Google Classrooms, the dates really make it easier to see it. It really kind of depends on the subject. So that might be part of it.
Thanks. And I also do want to respond as well. I know there was a question to Parent Square about whether teachers can provide kind of a weekly overview of what students will be doing in that class. As I mentioned, my son's Google Classroom has each current week posted, and then Monday, and what it is, Tuesday, and what they're doing. And so I think that the idea of some sort of weekly overview for students is definitely, whether that's an announcement in Google Classroom or the first assignment or something like that, definitely something we can share with teachers that is helpful. I know many teachers are posting everything Monday morning so that the kids have all week to work on it. And certainly I could see the benefit in providing some quick document that would be a quick check of, for this class, have I done the 4 things that the teacher is asking me to do this week?
Great. Okay, so and then sort of tangentially to that, we have a question. Some teachers say that students need to contact them by email versus the comments section of Google Classroom, and that seems to be problematic for some parents and students. And then also, is there a way to get rid of classes that are no longer a part of their schedule, like past semester wheel classes that sort of appear as extra boxes in the bottom?
So I'll start with the second half of that, which is that teachers can archive classes. And I know that many teachers do archive classes, so we can remind teachers at the end of terms to archive the previous term classes, certainly something that would clean up people's Google Classrooms. And then to the first part of that, Jen, I just totally lost my train of thought. Can you, the contacting teachers, emails versus comments.
Comments. So that's sort of the same standardization question.
It is, and I would say that in that case, it has a lot to do with the teacher's workflow. So for some teachers, they may be grabbing minutes to check email, and it's easiest to see student information there. For some teachers, they may be sitting down in front of their computer and navigating through Google Classroom to see that feedback. So again, I understand that that can make it challenging for families. What we're really working toward is being sure that teachers are very clear in communicating both with students and with families, so that there's clear information about the best way to communicate and what the practices are for that class. And as Jonna mentioned, the type of class, whether the subject matter, can affect the way that the best communication happens as well.
I can speak to that just a little bit too. I get questions, I get comments on both the Google Classroom site as comments, and then I also get them on email. And it really depends on the time of day, to be honest. If I'm on Google Classroom, which I am a lot, from 8 to 3:05, it's really easy to just type in an answer, although it's not as easy to type like a really long, thoughtful answer. And I do get those comments on my phone, like if I'm checking it at 8 o'clock at night. But when I go to respond, it's, probably 4 or 5 steps to log into Google Classroom to respond to that comment rather than an email. And that's just a lot easier to respond to. So I think it kind of depends.
And certainly one of the things that we see in distance learning is that teachers are doing their best and working hard to keep up with the 130, 100 numerous students that are under their care. And certainly they're doing everything that they can to have those quick feedback opportunities and communication pieces, clarification pieces. But it is, it is for them, they want to be sure that they are able to respond in an efficient and effective way. And that sometimes can just take a little longer to be sure that they're they've got the context for the question, that they're sitting down, that they're logged in. If it's in Google Classroom, that they've got that email. So we hear what parents are saying, and I don't know that there's a perfect solution for these things.
Just to summarize a bunch of comments that I've gotten as you were talking, that you know, can the district teach the teachers how to use Google Classroom in a consistent way, and can that be standardized, particularly in the fall if we are continuing to this? Yeah, basically everyone's wanting to have some sort of standard way so that it's not all over the place, and you've addressed sort of why that is a difficult piece of the puzzle to fit.
Yeah, and I think I want to echo what Jonna said as well, that different subjects really look different in terms of how work is collected, whether they're submitting the work via Google Classroom, whether they're doing it electronically or doing it on paper or doing something digitally on the screen of an iPad. And so all of those things impact the way that things are posted in Google Classroom. But as I've mentioned, I certainly will work with MBMS admin to see about ways to get feedback from students so that we can be sure we're representative of student voices in this as well, obviously, since they're the ones directly using Google Classroom.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of student confusion as well. Someone commented that their child got a D because they weren't clear about what was expected of them. I'm assuming that's prior to distance learning, but I'm not sure. Surely the teachers could be more empathetic to the fast and furious and confusing approach to this, and some grading grace. So just throwing that comment in there. As a question, someone else asked, why do missing assignments show up differently in Google Classroom on different devices? Parents sometimes see more missing items on a laptop than kids see on their iPads. I know for me, I get those Google Classroom updates daily on my phone, and I'm often saying to Atticus, have you finished this? This looks like these things are all outstanding. And then he pulls up his iPad and shows me he's turned it all in. But I think it's a good way for me to keep on track of making sure things don't fall through the cracks, but it's also confusing if parents are seeing a different set of criteria than students are.
Well, depending on when you receive the Guardian summary, it could be that the student has turned work in after the summary has been received, for example. And then certainly that updating piece, depending on whether the iPad has been connected to the internet. Like, for example, if the iPad has been sitting all day and then it's opened, it likely needs to refresh in order for the most up-to-date list to be populated. But from device to device, as long as those lists are refreshed, they should not be they should not be different on one device or the other. I would think it was a refresh option or an updated situation there. Also, just to be sure people are aware, many teachers were using Google Classroom before we went to remote learning to manage workflow. It may have looked different than it does in remote learning, but much of this is not new to students at MVMS. You know, I would say all of them have joined at least the grade level classroom. And I would assume almost all of them have at some point in their time at MVMS joined a Google Classroom and used it for workflow in some way. And in fact, we do use Google Classroom in grades 3 through 5 as well. So many students are coming into the middle school with some experience from Google Classroom at the elementary level. Again, certainly different than the remote learning experience where Google Classroom is the place to interact often, you know, other than maybe a Zoom session or via email. But much of this should not be completely new to students at MVMS.
So there's a specific question about Spanish. Jonna, did you have some more that you wanted to add on to that?
Oh, no, I was just going to add that, yeah, just like in kind of regular school, different teachers' methods of doing things, collecting homework and that kind of stuff is, you know, they're always going to be different. I mean, even me as a teacher librarian, since I co-teach with teachers, I'm always having to ask them, okay, do you want this or do you want this? But I also think that that's kind of a good skill for kids to get, kind of making sure that they ask their teacher just which method they're going to use. And it is hard. It really is. But I think most of the teachers that I know are really trying to be understanding about that too.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, we definitely do try to go over updates or offer additional training in Google Classroom for people who might be trying to use it in a new way in the new year. every new year or throughout the year. And as I also mentioned, it is often the case that Google updates something. So for example, I did this presentation a couple of years ago to the PTSA. I was looking back at my slides and the screens look very different. So of course, that's a learning piece for students as well. However, in my opinion, it certainly adds a level of challenge sometimes for students, but it's also a really realistic way that technology works in our lives, that it is constantly changing. And so step by step is not always the best way. Instead, to teach or learn something for students, it might be the best way at first, but then it's important for students to be thinking about what they're trying to do and what would make sense as the next step.
Great. So we have some specific questions about guardian access and how to do this.
So that would be enabled by teachers. So if they have not received an email from teachers asking them if they want to be a guardian or inviting them to be a guardian in the class, then it's not something that the teacher is enabling at this time in the class.
Okay, and then a specific question about Spanish. What is Fluency Matters and how can a parent be sure that this is handed in?
Fluency Matters, I believe, is a specific software that the teacher is using in that class. I think it's a pilot software that they're using that might be an online textbook or have lessons as part of it. And so it would be important for that family to reach out to the teacher to find out specifically how Fluency Matters assignments should be handled.
And then how do we see how the assignments are being graded? This question says, I know this is a pass-fail now, but can we see how well the students are understanding the assignments, and if they get things wrong, are these mistakes being corrected?
It depends on the teacher. So as with all grading, grading is teacher specific and is individualized based on the type of class and the teacher methods in the class. So the best places are to probably use Aries portal still. So the Aries parent portal is where students' grades are still being kept. That includes assignments as they're recorded. Some teachers also use Google Classroom gradebook, and they have likely added messages to their websites or emails to families in Parent Square, for instance, about the way that they're grading or showing assignments, particularly during this time of remote learning. So Aries portal is probably the #1 way that I would say parents should follow up or note things about their students' assignments.
Okay, and then again, some more comments about teacher training consistency. You know, are we as a district teaching the teachers how to use Google Classroom consistently? And if not, why not? And can there be more consistency across the board? You've sort of addressed that, but I guess if we can talk about it a little bit further to explain to parents how difficult that has been. But hopefully it'll be improved in the fall.
Well, I can say that I have trained all teachers in the district at one time or another in using Google Classroom. And based on the PD, the professional development structure in the Mill Valley School District, it's not like we all sit down for the exact same PD every year. So we don't have the chance to train the whole staff in the whole district around any topic every year. But we certainly do updates every year around technology, particularly in those grades where the teachers are using something like Google Classroom. And it's all a work in progress. As teachers are more familiar with different platforms, they understand what will work better and how it will work best in their classroom. Just like any teacher changes lessons from year to year based on the students in the class, based on the material that they're covering, adjustments that they're making, those same things may influence the way that they're using Google Classroom from year to year. And as I mentioned, we will certainly be reflecting on Google Classroom and the way that it's worked during remote learning and thinking about recommendations that we can provide to teachers about different ways of doing things, as well as updates that may happen to Google Classroom over the summer. And certainly I will take the feedback about consistency being helpful for families to those sessions.
I can put in a plug for you if I may, Kate. Kate has been so good over the last, several years, but certainly this year, even if she's not doing a full-on like professional development thing, before lots and lots, if not all of our staff meetings, she will give us updates. She has really clear instructions and slides presentations for what teachers can use, especially with Google Classroom, new things like that. And she consistently offers to sit down one-on-one with teachers or in small groups. And I've seen this all the time in the library. So they have a lot of opportunity to work with her to make sure that that Google Classroom is meeting their needs, if that helps at all.
Thanks, Jonna. And I would just add also, I appreciate that, Jonna, that teachers are often meeting amongst themselves and in the teams where they teach closely, or their subject cohorts, subject department groups, you know, to think about ways that they can do things as a department or as a grade level as well. So that is, teachers are constantly working, you know, they all want students to be as successful as possible in their classes, and they are often meeting about those things as well and figuring out adjustments. So I'm sure that this will be a conversation with teachers going into ending the year this year and starting the year next year as well.
So another portion of that a comment, one of the comments that addresses is that someone says, I think it's almost mandatory really to have the parents take the Google Classroom overview so we all understand how the assignments are posted and we know how to support the children. It's very complicated, there are many angles and all the teachers use it differently. So maybe to address that, if we had a series of parent Google Classroom talk similar to this one, but maybe broken down, like, you know, you have this specific question or regular Q&As that would help support parents to support their kids if we continue distance learning in the fall.
Sure.
That might be helpful to parents who have one or two questions that they want to jump in and ask, but aren't necessarily figuring out on their own.
Also, just a note about the feedback thing as well. Feedback doesn't show up in the Guardian Digest. So if students are receiving feedback in the form of private comments or something like that, but as a parent could sit down with their student to see the comments that teachers are giving specifically on assignments. So they might give feedback through private comments on assignments. They might also give comments specifically on a Google Doc, for instance, if it was a piece of writing, like you might be familiar with Word commenting. It looks similar in Google Docs. So there might be Google Docs comments on writing that a student has done or something like that.
So two comments. One person says that they're not getting information regarding communication from most teachers, that they're getting it from one, but not from any of the others. I'm not sure if there's any standardization around how often teachers are supposed to be communicating with students, or rather with parents through Classroom. I think that's what they're getting at. Some teachers are communicating with the students more regularly than others.
Again, I think that depends on the subject matter and the way that classes are structured. So this also could be referring to Parent Square posts, and whether specific teachers are posting to their classes or their parents of classes in Parent Square. As far as I know, there was not a specific recommendation from the school about communicating a certain number of times with parents. I think also, you know, certainly we know that during distance learning in particular, parents are an important part of students' learning. And also these are middle schoolers, and we, you know, I know many teachers hope that the students can continue to work on their independence and their own advocacy for things. And so much communication is likely happening directly to students through Google Classroom or through email and otherwise.
And then one last suggestion. I know you guys probably need to wrap it up. It's been an hour now. A suggestion to pass along: using Google Hangouts or their latest version that resembles Zoom would probably be really helpful for integration with Google Classroom, and then the grading portal. And
so there's a Google Hangouts piece, and then there's a Google Meets piece. So Google Hangouts is a chat. They used to call it Google Hangouts Meet, and that was the Meet, which is Google's video conferencing option. It's now, I think, just called Google Meet. But then there's also Google Hangouts, and Google Hangouts is like a chat. So at this point, we have not used Google Hangouts widely because it would be a place that students could chat back and forth between students. During distance learning, they're more than likely to be using their personal devices rather than their school devices. But during the school year, to have Hangouts going all day is another quicker option than something like emails back and forth, which already can be distracting to students. So we're constantly trying to balance the things that are useful for keeping on top of things with the things that make it more challenging for students to focus on their schoolwork. Google Meet actually has many fewer features than Zoom. So that's one of the reasons many teachers are using Zoom. For example, breakout rooms, which allows teachers to monitor small groups of students working on different things during one session. Also, some of the different security features and view features are very different in Meet versus Zoom. So we do have some teachers who are trying Meet and using Meet, and the screen sharing options are also very different in Meet than in Zoom. Again, my student is at home using Meet, and I have a brother that works for Google, so we're always constantly navigating the Google universe. And I have to say that Zoom is by far the fuller featured platform for face-to-face interactions with students.
Good to know. They clarified I think I kind of butchered the last comment about the communications from teachers. They clarified that for kids that have special needs, there really needs to be more parent communication, because it's been very stressful for kids that have ADHD, or I'm assuming other special needs as well, that aren't able to focus and need a lot more parent intervention. That having that communication between the teachers and the parents is really crucial, and they'd like to improve the way of guaranteeing that somehow.
Okay. I am happy to take that feedback to our team. I know that one of the things that's happened in remote learning is that many of our support teachers have been added, and many of our instructional aides have been added as co-teachers to Google Classrooms, so that they're able to work more directly on student work or see student work as students are working in Google Classroom. And I know that this is an area that we are will be sure to focus on, and be sure that we're thinking ahead to looking at ways that we can continue to support students who need extra support during distance learning.